Welcome to the Deep Dive. To
Yeah.
you, our listener, just thank you for joining us today. Welcome. And may God richly bless your day and the entire week ahead of you. We're really thrilled to have you with us as we jump into today's text.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you. There's just an incredibly rich amount of material to cover today.
There really is. Today we have a very specific mission. We're diving into Genesis chapter 42. And we're going to be pulling heavily from the historical, theological, and literary insights in both the Holman and the NAA Study Bibles.
Right, which are fantastic resources for this specific narrative.
Absolutely. Now, for those of you who followed this topic, you know the basic beats of the patriarchs. You know about the coat of many colors, the betrayal in the pit, the fact that a brother was sold into Egyptian slavery. We all know that Sunday school version.
Right, the highlight reel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today, we're pushing way past that basic summary. We're looking at the actual psychological fallout. We are exploring a 20-year-old family secret, the really suffocating cognitive distortion caused by unconfessed guilt, and this incredibly dramatic family reunion.
It's packed with these high-stakes tests, masterful disguises, and, really some of the thickest dramatic irony in all of ancient literature.
It is, and that concept of cognitive distortion, that's going to be central to what we're talking about today.
Oh, absolutely. The study notes we're using, they don't treat this chapter as just some, historical bridge to quickly get the Israelites down into Egypt.
Right.
Instead, they frame it as this profound, almost clinical look into the human psyche. The core question the text is wrestling with is how human beings operate when their past trauma and their hidden transgressions finally catch up with them.
It really is a masterclass in narrative tension
Yeah,
and retributive psychology, honestly.
definitely.
So let's look at the catalyst that sets this entire psychological pressure cooker in motion. We are dealing with a severe regional famine.
Right, and in the ancient Near East, a famine of this magnitude wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat.
Canaan gets hit incredibly hard, and it forces the patriarch Jacob into a total corner. Because the Nile River provided this much more stable agricultural baseline, Egypt basically became the default breadbasket for all the surrounding nations during these severe droughts.
So Jacob has to make this desperate administrative decision. He has to send his sons down to Egypt to buy grain.
But he doesn't send all of them. He sends 10 sons, deliberately keeping one back. Benjamin.
Yeah, and the study materials really delve deeply into the dysfunction that this specific decision highlights. Because Benjamin is the youngest, sure, but his primary significance in this family structure is that he is the only surviving son of Jacob's favored deceased wife, Rachel.
And the other son of Rachel, of course, was Joseph.
Exactly. So Jacob's decision to withhold Benjamin, it speaks volumes about the unhealed trauma he's still carrying around. He actually tells his older sons he's keeping Benjamin back because he's terrified that some disaster might happen to him on the journey.
That phrase, some disaster, it is so telling.
It really is.
It's not just a pragmatic fear of, bandits on the road. It is a pure trauma response. Jacob has been living for 2 decades with this manufactured grief of losing Joseph to a wild animal, which of course is the lie that 10 brothers sold him.
Right, they fabricated that whole story.
So by keeping Benjamin back, Jacob is essentially telegraphing to those 10 older men that their lives are expendable in a way that Benjamin's is not.
Yeah. The family dynamic is still completely fractured by the ghost of Joseph. Those 10 men, they are marching down to Egypt, carrying the heavy baggage of their father's overt favoritism and his deep-seated mistrust of them.
And that emotional baggage becomes the lens through which they experience literally everything that happens next.
Everything. So they arrive in Egypt, and they're just one of countless desperate groups looking for relief. They get funneled into this massive bureaucratic system, and eventually they're brought before the governor of the land, the supreme official in charge of the grain distribution.
And the text specifically notes that they bow down before him with their faces to the earth.
Yes.
Which, for anyone reading the text, this is the ultimate moment of dramatic irony. Because this untouchable, terrifying Egyptian vizier, it's Joseph.
It's the very brother they threw into a dry cistern 20 years ago.
Exactly. The one they sold to Ishmaelite traders. And the Holman Study Bible brings out a brilliant connection here. As these 10 grown men press their faces into the dirt, Joseph's mind instantly flashes back to the prophetic dreams he had.
The dreams from back in Genesis 37.
Right. Back when he was this arrogant teenager. The dreams where his brother's sheaves of wheat bowed down to his sheaf.
The very dreams that incited their murderous jealousy in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now, 2 decades later, that agricultural metaphor has become a literal reality.
Yeah.
They're bowing down to him precisely because he controls the wheat.
It's incredible. And the realization of those dreams, it's a pivotal theological point in the narrative. It validates the divine orchestration behind all of Joseph's suffering.
But from a purely psychological standpoint, the immediate question that you have to ask is how could 10 men stand face to face with their own flesh and blood and remain completely oblivious to who he is?
It's a great question because it's easy to just assume they were, unobservant. But the contextual evidence paints a very different picture of this disguise.
First of all, we have to account for the passage of time.
Right. Joseph was 17 when they sold him. He is now a mature man, probably in his late 30s. He's been hardened by years in a dungeon, and now he's elevated to the highest echelon of a global superpower.
But the physical disguise is equally impenetrable. As the study notes highlight, Joseph would have been completely assimilated into the visual culture of the Egyptian elite.
Yeah, he would be clean-shaven. Whereas Canaanite men wore these full beards, he'd be dressed in the finest Egyptian linen, wearing the gold chain of his office.
Probably wearing that traditional coal-eye makeup of the nobility, too.
Exactly. And adding to that physical transformation is the linguistic barrier. The text explicitly mentions that Joseph uses an interpreter to communicate with them.
Right, so by never speaking Hebrew in their presence, he completely masks his origins.
But the NAA notes suggest that the most powerful element of his disguise isn't physical or linguistic, it's psychological.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Yeah, it's a classic case of cognitive boundary setting. The brothers believe Joseph is either dead or working as a lowly slave somewhere deep in the empire.
Right.
So their brains literally cannot process the data that the second most powerful man in the known world is the helpless boy they sold. It falls entirely outside their realm of possibilities, so they aren't even looking for a resemblance.
That psychological blindness is just incredible. To them, he is simply this imposing, untouchable foreign autocrat. And Joseph really leans into that intimidating persona.
He really does.
He doesn't just reveal himself and hug them. He initiates this brutal interrogation. He speaks harshly to them and accuses them of being a military scouting party.
He claims they've come to uncover the weak points of the land.
Right. And the Hebrew phrase used there is sometimes translated as the nakedness of the land,
which specifically refers to unfortified borders or vulnerable defense infrastructure. And the study materials point out that this is not a casual accusation.
No, not at all.
In the geopolitics of the ancient Near East, accusing a group of Canaanites of espionage was a capital offense. Joseph is putting them under the most extreme pressure imaginable.
This harshness, it's a highly calculated tactic on his part. He needs to evaluate their character. He is testing them to see if they are still the same ruthless, self-serving men who tossed him in a pit, or if the last 20 years have actually changed them.
And the effectiveness of that tactic is immediate. The brothers are terrified. They instantly go on the defensive.
In their scramble to prove they're just this harmless family of shepherds, they start spilling their deepest personal history.
They tell this terrifying governor, "We are 12 brothers, sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more."
One is no more.
Yeah.
That specific phrasing carries immense narrative weight. They are staring directly at the brother they are referring to, perpetuating this lie they have lived with for 2 decades.
They are so locked into their own deception that they're using it as a defense mechanism. But Joseph doesn't let up. He throws all 10 of them into an Egyptian prison for 3 days.
And you just have to imagine the sensory deprivation, the sheer terror of those 3 days. They are locked in a foreign dungeon, entirely at the mercy of a man who seems convinced they're spies.
But after 3 days, the tension shifts. Joseph comes to them, and he actually lessens the severity of his decree.
He says to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God."
Right. And he decrees that he will keep only one brother bound in Egypt as collateral. The other 9 are permitted to return to Canaan with the grain to save their starving families.
But the catch, the ultimate test, is that they must bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, back to Egypt to verify their story.
And that phrase, "for I fear God," is a remarkable concession from someone in Joseph's position.
Yeah, what do the Holman notes say about that?
The Holman notes suggest he is subtly signaling to them that his power, unlike a typical ancient autocrat, operates within a divine moral framework. He isn't going to let their family starve, but he demands truth.
However, the true surgical precision of Joseph's test is revealed in his choice of the hostage. He binds Simeon right in front of their eyes.
And the choice of Simeon is a brilliant piece of psychological maneuvering.
It really is, because under normal patriarchal protocol, if someone has to take the fall for the group, it falls to the firstborn.
Right. Reuben was the oldest. He should have been the one bound.
But Joseph deliberately bypasses Reuben. The textual analysis suggests Joseph remembers and, in fact, overhears in the very next sequence that Reuben had actually tried to intervene and save his life 20 years ago.
Yeah, since Reuben showed some measure of mercy, Joseph skips him and moves to the second-born. Simeon becomes the prime candidate to bear the responsibility.
It just demonstrates that Joseph is not acting out of blind, chaotic vengeance. He is orchestrating this scenario with the deliberate, measured intent.
And that measured intent creates an environment of unbearable pressure for the brothers. It's in this exact moment, standing before the governor with Simeon in chains, that their psychological defenses completely collapse.
Fully collapse. Believing that the Egyptian vizier cannot understand their native tongue because he's been using an interpreter, they turn to one another and begin speaking in Hebrew.
And what they say is one of the most raw confessions in the entire biblical narrative.
They say, "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us."
It's staggering. It has been 20 years of silence, 20 years of living a lie in front of their father. But the guilt has been simmering just below the surface this entire time.
It takes this specific, terrifying mirroring of their past crime, being falsely accused and imprisoned by a powerful figure, to make them finally verbalize their guilt.
And the commentary here focuses heavily on their theology of retributive justice. They don't view their current predicament as bad luck or just a harsh geopolitical reality.
No, they immediately, reflexively connect their current suffering in Egypt to their past sin against Joseph.
The conscience of these men is entirely preoccupied with their transgression. Then Reuben, stepping back into that oldest brother role, delivers this devastating reprimand.
The ultimate, "I told you so."
Exactly. He says, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you would not listen." So now there comes a reckoning for his blood.
The psychological haunting is profound. Their past isn't something they left behind in a dry pit. It is an active, demanding presence that colors their entire reality.
And the emotional crescendo of this scene is Joseph's reaction.
Yes.
Because he's standing right there. He understands every single syllable of their Hebrew confession. He hears the agonizing remorse in their voices and the revelation that Reuben had actually tried to stop the sale.
The text notes that the emotional weight of this is so heavy that Joseph has to turn away from them, and he weeps.
This weeping reveals a profound crack in the armor of his Egyptian persona. We see this stark juxtaposition. Outwardly, Joseph has meticulously crafted the image of a cold, calculating, unyielding judge.
But inwardly, the study notes describe a man harboring an intensely compassionate heart. The trauma he endured hasn't eradicated his love for his family. He's deeply moved by this undeniable evidence of their remorse.
Yet, in this massive display of self-control, he wipes his face, turns back around, and resumes the harsh charade.
Because he knows the test isn't complete.
Right. He knows he has to see what they will do when Benjamin's life is on the line. Will they abandon the new favorite son just like they abandoned him?
That restraint is incredible. He commits to the long game. He sends the 9 remaining brothers on their journey back to Canaan. But before they leave, Joseph executes one more secret maneuver.
This is a great detail.
He commands his servants to fill their sacks with grain, give them provisions for the long journey, and secretly return the exact amount of silver they had paid for the grain, tucking it right into the top of their sacks.
This act is fundamentally a secret gift of grace. Joseph is providing for his family beyond what they asked or paid for. But the psychological impact of this gift, it provides our most fascinating insight into the mechanics of guilt.
It perfectly illustrates how guilt distorts reality. You picture the scene. The 9 brothers are exhausted, they're terrified, they're making their way back to Canaan. They stop for the night at a roadside encampment.
And one of the brothers opens his sack to get fodder for his donkey. And right there, gleaming in the mouth of the sack, is his bundle of silver.
Objectively, finding out you just received a massive amount of food for free. That should be a moment of absolute jubilation. They should be celebrating this clerical error.
But instead, the text says their hearts fail them.
They are completely paralyzed by fear. They turn to each other, trembling, and ask, "What is this that God has done to us?"
And the study notes unpack the cognitive distortion at play here. Because their baseline reality is anchored in the guilt of a massive, unconfessed crime, they are completely incapable of recognizing grace.
They filter every unexpected event through the lens of divine retribution.
Exactly. They don't see returned money. They see planted evidence. They assume this is a calculated trap set by the Egyptian governor to legally execute them as thieves.
It is a tragic state of existence.
Mm.
When you are convinced that the universe or the divine is out to balance the scales against you, you expect a trap at every turn. You are alienated from joy.
You can't even accept a blessing because you're utterly convinced it's a curse in disguise.
And that paranoia rides with them all the way back to Canaan, where they finally stand before their father Jacob.
And the report they have to give him is a total disaster. They recount the interrogation, the accusation of espionage, Simeon's imprisonment,
And the terrifying ultimatum that they cannot return to Egypt and therefore cannot survive the famine unless they bring Benjamin with them.
And just as they're delivering this devastating news, the full discovery happens. They begin emptying their sacks of grain in front of Jacob, and every single one of them finds their bundle of silver.
The localized panic from the encampment now infects the entire household. It is a collective terror. And Jacob's reaction is just a portrait of overwhelming irrational grief.
Jacob's theology in this moment is one of absolute despair. He looks at his sons and issues this chilling lament. He says, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin."
And he concludes this outburst with a deeply pessimistic declaration. All these things are against me.
The NAA commentary on that specific phrase, "all these things are against me," highlights the profound tragedy of his perspective.
Because from his limited human vantage point, his assessment seems completely accurate. He's lost 2 sons, and he's being asked to risk a third to a hostile foreign power.
But the reader knows the divine reality. Joseph is alive. He is the savior of the known world. Simeon is perfectly safe in his custody, and the silver in the sacks is a gesture of love.
God is actively orchestrating the salvation of their entire family line, yet Jacob's grief blinds him to any possibility of hope.
It's a powerful reminder of how human perspective is so often entirely divorced from the broader reality of a situation. But the brothers know they have to eventually return to Egypt, or the famine will claim all of them.
Right. So Reuben, desperate to assert leadership and assuage his father's fears, makes a proposition that is, honestly, it's almost grotesque in its absurdity.
It's truly bizarre.
Yeah.
Reuben says to Jacob, "Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands and I will bring him back."
He's trying to offer the ultimate collateral to guarantee Benjamin's safety.
And the study notes offer an excellent critique of Reuben's logic here. It is a pledge born of sheer panic. It is completely devoid of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, the fundamental flaw in Reuben's reasoning is that retributive violence against his own children offers absolutely zero emotional comfort to a grieving grandfather.
If Jacob loses Benjamin, having the right to murder 2 of his own grandsons would only multiply the tragedy. It wouldn't mitigate it at all.
It demonstrates the desperate, irrational lengths people will go to when they're operating under extreme stress and guilt. It's an empty pledge, and Jacob recognizes it as such immediately.
He outright rejects the offer. He declares, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol."
That mention of Sheol is significant.
Yes, in ancient Near Eastern theology, Sheol is the realm of the dead, the grave. Jacob is stating in no uncertain terms that the loss of Benjamin would be the final fatal blow.
He's predicting that he would literally die of a broken heart. Descending into the grave, consumed by unmitigated sorrow, the trauma is simply too deep, and his fear is entirely paralyzing.
And that paralyzing fear brings the narrative of this chapter to a grinding, unresolved halt.
The famine is still raging outside their doors. Simeon is sitting in a holding cell in Egypt, wondering if his brothers have abandoned him.
The 9 brothers are immobilized by a guilt that is distorting their every thought.
And Jacob is trapped in a defensive crouch of grief, refusing to risk his youngest son. It is a masterful suspension of narrative tension. And every bit of that tension stems from decades of secrets, deception, and unconfessed sin.
The text forces the reader to sit in the discomfort of that unresolved reality. It demands that we look closely at the destructive power of hidden transgressions and how they fracture families and distort human perception across generations.
So bringing all of this historical and psychological analysis forward, what does this mean for you, the listener? Why should a thousands of years old family crisis matter to us today? I want you to reflect deeply on the mechanics of unconfessed guilt that we observed in the brothers.
Consider how your own psyche operates.
Exactly. When we harbor hidden guilt, unresolved shame, or secrets we've buried for years, it fundamentally alters the algorithm by which we process reality.
It can take a moment of unexpected grace, a sudden stroke of luck, or unwarranted generosity, like finding the exact amount of silver you need hidden in your provisions, and warp it into a source of paralyzing anxiety.
We start waiting for the other shoe to drop. We assume the universe is setting a trap for us because deep within our conscience, we believe we deserve punishment.
It's a universal psychological truth. If the lens through which you view the world is fractured by guilt, you cannot clearly perceive grace, nor can you experience peace when positive things occur.
The narrative challenges us to evaluate what hidden burdens we might be carrying that are actively distorting our perception of the people and the circumstances around us.
That is a vital reflection.
And as we conclude our time together, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over in the days ahead. Think about Joseph's secret tears. We regularly interact with people in our daily lives who project a formidable exterior.
They might be in positions of authority, strict rulemakers, demanding supervisors, tough evaluators, or harsh judges.
We see only the rigid professional mask they wear, but consider how often those individuals might actually be harboring profound, unspoken compassion.
Perhaps they share a history with you or carry a hidden pain of their own that they feel obligated to conceal behind their outward persona in order to fulfill their role or protect their boundaries.
We rarely, if ever, know the full emotional reality of the people sitting across from us.
That is a deeply empathetic takeaway. It challenges us to look beyond the immediate, intimidating surface of our interactions, recognizing the complex humanity beneath. Just as there was a weeping brother hidden behind the harsh accusations of an Egyptian vizier.
I couldn't agree more. Well, that concludes our deep dive into the profound psychology and history of Genesis 42. Thank you for dedicating your time to explore these ancient yet incredibly relevant truths with us. We are so grateful for your curiosity. As we close, we want to remind you that God blesses all the listeners. Take care and keep diving deep.